Probably each of you believes that all criminals should get what they deserve. But have you heard how much time real tough criminals spend behind bars? In this video, I will tell you how many years the first black president of South Africa served, how one can end up in jail without trial or investigation, and also share the story of the longest incarceration in US history. First, I would like to tell you the amazing story of a couple. The married life of Ihiya Abraham and Unruh lasted a long 22 years. Their happy marriage began when the girl was just 19 years old, while the man was almost 20 years a senior. Then, one fine day, Unruh decided to file for divorce. It's worth noting that the family had been living in Israel for a long time, and there, as you know, special laws apply. If someone does not recognize the decision of the religious court, they go to jail. The whole argument happened just because of the age difference between the couple. At the time of filing for divorce, Unruh was already over 30, while Ihiya was well over 50. The woman didn't like living with an old man and found herself a new young man. However, to officially start a marriage with him, she first had to divorce Ihiya. Unruh filed for divorce in a religious court, which approved it. But the man completely disagreed with the decision and did not recognize it, which landed him in jail. Ihiya Abraham spent a whole 32 years in prison just for not wanting to let his wife go. The phrase "stubborn as a mule" fits well here. The man died at the age of 81 in prison, never agreeing with the court's decision and not letting his wife go. By that time, she was already over 60, which meant she could no longer find a new lover. As they say, neither to oneself nor to people. The next story I want to tell you is no less interesting. People do not always end up in prison as a result of long court proceedings. For example, in the 19th century, in the Russian Empire, anti-monarchical movements began to emerge in society, and the way to deal with people involved in them was without much ceremony. Mikhail Beydeman was part of such a society. After finishing school, he went to London. There, under a pseudonym, he worked in a printing house, printing anti-monarchical texts. But he didn't want to only do this work. The revolutionary wanted to act. So Mikhail developed his crazy plan. He had to return to Petersburg and attempt an assassination on the emperor. However, something did not go according to plan. Mikhail Beydeman was detained at the border. With him, he had manuscripts of anti-monarchical articles, as well as papers stating that he was the illegitimate son of one of the emperors and that the throne in the country had been usurped. In addition, he had a pistol, bullets and gunpowder, and even a dagger. Law enforcement immediately understood why this man wanted to enter the country. They immediately reported Mikhail's arrest to Alexander II. Naturally, the emperor didn't like this man at all. He literally flared up with anger and ordered him to be sent to prison without trial or investigation. As a result, Mikhail Beydeman spent 20 years behind bars, after which he was released. However, by that time, the man had lost his mind, and freedom was not destined for him. He was sent to a psychiatric hospital, where he died 6 years later. In the end, Mikhail Beydeman spent more than 26 years in confinement without any trial or investigation. And the amount of time our next character spent behind bars will simply amaze you. At least I was astonished while searching for this information. Paul Geidel spent more than 68 years in prison. It's just unbelievable. This man even made it into the Guinness Book of Records for the longest sentence. Paul Geidel, an American criminal who had a very difficult childhood. When he was 5 years old, his father died, which led to the boy ending up in an orphanage. He spent most of his childhood and youth there. By the age of 14, Paul had finished school and started working. He was mostly employed in various hotels. However, his impoverished childhood made its mark. He harbored a strong dislike for rich people. In 1911, Paul Geidel was working at a hotel where a broker decided to stay. Observing that the man was very wealthy, Paul decided to rob him. He sneaked into his room, strangled the man with a chloroform-soaked cloth, and began searching for money. Unfortunately, he was not very lucky. The broker did not carry cash, so Paul only found a few dollars. The hotel quickly became aware of the murder, and finding the culprit was not difficult. Almost 2 months later, Paul Geidel appeared in court. The young man was sentenced to 20 years of imprisonment. While serving his sentence in prison, he was diagnosed with a mental illness. He was then transferred for compulsory treatment to another prison. This began his long journey from one place of confinement to another. In 1974, they wanted to release the elderly Paul, but he refused to leave his cell. The decision was made to keep him there, as both the staff and other inmates had grown accustomed to him. He caused no trouble. However, after 6 years, Paul Geidel was finally released. He had to be forcibly removed from his cell. The elderly man was sent to a nursing home where he died 7 years later. In the end, Paul Geidel spent a total of 68 years and 245 days in prison instead of the 20 years he was originally sentenced to. And the most astonishing thing is that he himself did not wish to leave his cell. Of course, I couldn't fail to tell you about the woman who served the longest term in prison. It was Winnie Judd. This woman spent more than 34 years in confinement, and I will tell you how it happened right now. Winnie Judd worked as a secretary in a medical clinic. She didn't earn enough for independent living, and it wasn't particularly enjoyable. Because of this, Winnie lived together with 2 of her friends who also worked at this clinic, and all 3 girls fell in love with a businessman named Jack. This man didn't want a relationship with any of these women as he was married, but this didn't stop the friends. They continued to share Jack among themselves. At one of their gatherings, the disputes over who would have the man escalated into a serious altercation. Winnie completely disagreed with her friends' arguments and made a terrible decision. She took out a gun and shot them while they were sleeping. Winnie Judd was then faced with the question of what to do with the bodies. A rather poor idea came to her mind. She dismembered the victims' bodies and placed them in suitcases. After that, she went to the railway station and bought a ticket to Los Angeles. That's where she got caught. A baggage car employee smelled something not quite fresh from the suitcase and noticed bloodstains. He thought Winnie was transporting spoiled meat and asked her to open the suitcase. However, the woman panicked, left the bags and ran away. The police who arrived at the scene opened the suitcases and discovered the bodies. About a month later, Winnie was caught and sent to prison. In court, she was sentenced to death, but later the punishment was changed to long-term imprisonment. She was almost immediately found to have mental illnesses and was sent for treatment to a prison hospital in Arizona. From this hospital, the woman escaped 6 times, and her last escape was the most successful. Winnie managed to reach San Francisco and, under a pseudonym, got a job with a wealthy family where she lived. After 6 years, she was caught and sent back for treatment. Winnie Judd spent another 2 years in prison and was released. She lived to be 93 years old. But not all criminals immediately end up in prison. Take, for example, Vasiliy Maryanchuk. This native of the Odessa region was very well known in the criminal world. He led an organized criminal group that included over 70 fighters. These were former police officers, athletes, and military personnel. The organization was responsible for more than 20 deliberate murders. In the 1990s, in the post-Soviet space, there were a huge number of different organized criminal groups. However, Vasiliy Maryanchuk's organization stood out among many others. It was linked to contract killings of prominent figures, such as the editor of the Evening Odessa newspaper, a colonel of the Security Service of Ukraine (SBU), several high-ranking officials, and even an assassination attempt on the mayor of Odessa. Naturally, efforts were made for a long time to catch these criminals. In 1999, Maryanchuk tried to flee Ukraine to Hungary. He succeeded, but even in another country, he was detained. After that, Vasiliy was sent to a pre-trial detention center in the city of Mykolaiv. There he was to await the court's decision. In the end, Vasiliy Maryanchuk spent a whole 15 years in the detention center, and only after such a long period was he sentenced to life imprisonment. And all these 15 years counted towards his prison term. While I was researching information and preparing the script for this video, I discovered simply astonishing information. Did you know that the first black president of South Africa spent 27 years in prison before becoming the leader of the state? And the most amazing thing is that he received such a term not for a serious crime. Nelson Mandela fought for a long time for the rights of black people in South Africa. In 1962, he was arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment. Mandela spent 27 years in prison before being released in 1990. At that time, he began to fight against racial inequality. Nelson acted both within the country and on the international stage. 4 years of struggle led to the overcoming of apartheid, racial segregation in South Africa. And in 1994, Nelson Mandela became president of the country. He was even a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. He lived a long life and made a significant contribution to equality and the elimination of racial inequality. He was the president of South Africa for 5 years, and afterwards he continued his political activities. This remarkable man died at the age of 95, surrounded by his family on December 5, 2013. Next, I would like to tell you the story of a man who went through the war. As is known, such experiences can greatly affect a person's psyche. Howard Unruh served as a tank driver in the US Army during World War II. He kept a diary during the war, in which he detailed the corpses of enemies he had killed, which in my opinion is already a bad sign. After the war, Howard Unruh tried to lead a normal life. However, he continued his diary entries. Now, in a special notebook, he recorded the names of people who insulted him and mocked his homosexual tendencies. One day, Howard Unruh decided to put an end to the mockery. He took a combat pistol and shot 13 people, including 3 children. After that, he barricaded himself in his apartment. More than 60 heavily armed police officers surrounded his house. The man was captured using a gas attack. During interrogation, he was asked what exactly his neighbors had done to make him decide to kill them. His response shocked everyone. "They haven't done anything yet, but they've already bothered me enough." Only during the interrogation was it discovered that Howard had been injured. He was immediately sent to the hospital. There, psychiatrists diagnosed the former soldier with severe paranoid schizophrenia. This illness helped him avoid criminal responsibility. However, he still ended up in custody, this time in a psychiatric hospital. Perhaps the living conditions there were quite good. Howard Unruh spent 60 years there and died in 2009 at the age of 88. He set a real record for the longest stay in a closed psychiatric hospital in the USA. In conclusion, I would like to tell you about one of the most terrifying American serial killers. William George Heirens, better known as the Lipstick Killer, once confessed to 3 murders he committed in 1946. He earned his nickname because in the house where he committed one of the crimes, he wrote in red lipstick, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill again. I cannot control myself." In 1946, 17-year-old William George Heirens was arrested by the police during an attempted burglary. He resisted, so they had to neutralize him. The police did so in a cinematic fashion. They dropped 3 flower pots on his head, knocking him unconscious. He was interrogated for 6 days. The young man was injected with sodium pentothal, the truth serum, under which he confessed to killing a 6-year-old girl and 2 women. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. The message he left helped him avoid the death penalty. It demonstrated his inability to stop himself. After the sentence was passed, he recanted his confessions. He blamed the police until his death, claiming they coerced the confessions to imprison him and close the case. William George Heirens was in prison from 1946 until his death in 2012. He was 83 years old, having spent 65 of those years behind bars. According to some reports, William spent more time in prison than anyone else in US history. In this video, I talked about the most insane prison terms served by criminals. Thank you for watching.